So, welcome to part 3 of this wonderful dialogue that I'm having with Jaya. And if you notice either Jaya or I being a little slow, that's thanks to the wonderful lunch that we've been served by our host. Absolutely amazing food. And so all the blood is rushing to the stomach to digest that food. So there might be a little less going to the brain and to the tongue. So apologies for that, if there is any slip up. And with that, we get into part 3. And this is going to be about the importance of a spiritual centering for everybody, especially for entrepreneurs. And I'm using the word spiritual intentionally. And the role that we here in India, we have so many systems, methodologies, schools of thought, of philosophy and all of that. And how all of them have, in a certain sense, prepared us all for being entrepreneurs in our own right. With that, Jaya, I know that this is a topic that you are very, very, you feel you have strong views on. And I'm using the word strong in a positive sense. I'm not using it in a negative sense at all. You did touch upon the fact that to be an entrepreneur, you need to have spiritual centering. You need to have that. You also said it beautifully, that, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a startup, I'm this, I'm that, and therefore money is, I'm doing something great. And I'm doing it for the family, right, in some form or shape. That's not quite so true. It is the family that gives us the ability, the support, the centering that we need to be able to be situated, to be present. Right? I'd like you to expand on that. In your own journey, I know that you've had a few inflection points, if I may call it that. You've had your journey on this path of being spiritually centered. I know you've not experimented, wrong word. You have invested time, energy and effort in terms of learning systems of thinking, philosophy and all of that. How did it all, either consciously or unconsciously, how did it support you in your entrepreneurship journey? How did it support you through the trials and tribulations? I know you've had a few, right? Not getting into details. How did it help you? How did it support you in handling all of those things? So, white canvas, paint any picture that you want, sir.
First of all, thank you, GS, for the wide white canvas. So I have to say that I was very conventional in my thinking growing up, and I was what in the West is traditionally called a coconut, which is coconut is white on the inside, brown on the outside. They call the Chinese bananas, so yellow on the outside, white on the inside. So almost till 2008, I was a full coconut, which means I believed in the Western systems, what I had learned in 2008. While I am familiar with, I had gone into what people sort of in a cliched fashion called spirituality way before in the 90s. But I was still a very strong believer, supporter, you could say, proponent of the fact that, the Western mode of education was really the pinnacle of everything. And as somebody who really held your father in very high esteem, Guru Murthy says, West is best and forget the rest, and follow the West, is what he uses as a alliteration almost. Is the formula that seems to be peddled. I was part of that. Then in 2008, my daughter wanted to learn history of all things. And I was very dismissive of these, what they call as soft subjects, which would be English, literature, or because everything was science, technology, STEM, engineering, math. So why wouldn't my daughter want to do history? And I started reading up history. And then I realized that most of the history that we have been told for India and even for the West was all from a certain perspective and using a certain lens, which did not encompass the entire view. And in some cases was completely different from what the history should actually have narrated. And the one that I had come across and the one that I was investigating, so I could pick a few key elements that I came across at that time. And that was, by the way, the year in which I got those 60 copies of Being Different and distributed to the managers in the company. So if you take science, technology, economy, India was way ahead of the rest of the world for in terms of economy, almost till the 1500, 1600. Between India and China, they control 65% of the global economy. Once the British came in, that 65% went down to 2% of the world's economy when they left. So, if your economy was so big, you're 30, 35% of the global economy, then obviously you produce goods which the rest of the world wanted, which meant there were knowledge systems here which created these goods, which meant that the Indian knowledge systems which produced the principles, the technology to create those goods were far ahead of their times. And therefore, what were they? And then you find that there was no readily available way in which you could access. If this was true, how come our history keeps telling us that India was so backwards? So first the Mughals came.
When you say our history, we are talking about history.
As in taught in conventional schools.
Since when?
Let's say since the time I was in school, and I would say even for my dad. I mean, he was not very aware of these things. I would say maybe from independence or even before that. So somewhere our history, the history that is taught in schools, and I will say in English medium schools, at least the ones that I went to, and my contemporaries, all learned that we were civilized because the British came here. They gave us railway. Before that, the Mughals came and they civilized us and brought architecture and chicken tikka masala and Mughalai this. And before that, obviously, we were probably living from on the trees and eating raw meat.
So I'm going to play the devil's advocate, intentionally butting in. If we were so great, 30%, 40% of world GDP or whatever it is that it's called, how did we allow ourselves to be colonized? How did we allow our story not to be told? Because if we were so strong and so good, how did we lose it?
It's actually a brilliant question, and I have to say that it's a question that is burning in the minds of many people today. I'm not sure if there is a very clear answer. Different people have perspectives on it, and I will share my perspective. So I have closely interacted with some of my teachers who are from other systems of thinking. And one of them also have said in a book that, for example, Islam spread in 70 years from the time of its foundation from North Africa to the borders of India, just in 70 years. And that's all. And then goes on to describe various other things. If you actually peel back the covers, you will find that Islam spread by the sword, which meant that it was a highly warrior-like approach they had to spreading the faith, spreading their religion, which was fair enough. And the way they would fight, they adopted policies of total war. Indic civilization, on the other hand, if you follow from the time, and we have to regard our history as not myth. This was something later on imposed. If you look at Ramayana, for example, you will find that there is the Adam's Bridge, there is Kishkinda, which is near Hampi.
I'm sure it wasn't called Adam's Bridge then.
It wasn't. It was Ram Setu, what we call now. I don't know what it was called at that time. And then you have Chitrakoot, and you have all these are real places. And You look at all the names and kingdoms mentioned in Ramayana, you can actually see that it is very real that these events probably happened. In a way, they said that when the Brits came, they went through the Vedas, and it talks about the Saraswati as a mighty river. Now the Saraswati, they said there is no Saraswati at that time. So they called it it's a mythological river, and it is some notional, representative of something. Turns out Saraswati is a real river. And the Ghaggar in Rajasthan it's the dried up channel, paleo channel of the old Saraswati. And if you take it, when one satellite started going up and taking the pictures, you could very clearly see from space that the river Saraswati existed, and you could see the channel down to the Kutch where we have been, the Rann of Kutch. That was the mouth of the Saraswati. So then you go back and check, Saraswati was a mighty river at a certain period of time. That pushes Indic civilization way back, thousands of years before the Aryan invasion, supposed Aryan invasion theory. And I'm intentionally using these airbrushed quotes, which was cooked up. There was definitely no Aryan invasion. So
again, I'm interrupting you here intentionally, and in the interest of playing the devil's advocate. If it was cooked up also, right? If we had something that was strong and we had people living those values, people living those tenets that we are supposed to have had, how can somebody cook something else up and tell me and I will believe it?
So, two things. First, and I was coming to that, was that if you, this is again my teachers taught me, that if you don't deal with unreasonableness will deal with you. Translated to a context of violence and invasions, when the invaders and the Mongol hordes turned up at the gates of India, they were fighting a total war, which meant they needed to win only once. Like today's terrorist needs to succeed only once. The police has to win every time. If the police loses even once, they get a real black mark on their name. So if they won once, they would wipe out the population of that region and they would enslave whoever was remaining, the women and children. The Indians had to win every time because they were constantly being invaded. And why were they being invaded? Because India was the richest. Columbus did not go to find America. Columbus did not go to find South Asia. Columbus set out to find India. Why? Because India was the richest country in terms of knowledge, in terms of wealth, in terms of capacities or learnings. And the rest of Southeast Asia used to send people to India to study. And they still do. From today even in Bali, from the temples, people come to Varanasi to train as priests in the temples in Bali in Indonesia. So when they came, we, for some reason, fought wars according to our principles. And we did not deal with unreasonableness.
This brings me to a very interesting thing. Again, I am touching back to what I referred to earlier, habit and ritual, right? Many people call it ritualistic when it is being done without understanding. I'm saying it is habituated, and it is not ritualistic if it is not done with understanding.
Correct.
So when you talk about we were fighting a certain way, right? We probably, the people, when I say we, I'm talking about the population that existed then, didn't probably understand it well, didn't or I could also look at it very differently, interestingly. I came across a cartoon that it says, we don't see the world the way the world is, we see the world the way we are. And interestingly, what was there was a rhinoceros painting. And every painting that the rhinoceros had had a horn in the middle.
Yep.
Right? So I'm saying that if we were so industrious, if we were so ingenuous, if we were so learned, how could we not understand that, our rules apply to us, right? Anybody who's willing to play football will play football within the guidelines. That is, if I'm going to be playing football. If I'm on the football field and somebody comes in with a lance and riding a horse, and I'm going to say, I can't touch the ball with my hand, I can't do anything, that's my idiocy, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. And I have to, that's a question that bothers a lot of people. If so in the Indic system, the individual actually does not count for much, which is even true in India today, that the family is the basic unit with which the government also views the society. In the West, the individual is the basic unit with which the government views society. So the individual, the father and mother are distinct, the children are distinct. In India, it's a family. So father, mother, kids, maybe sometimes the extended family, the in-laws and the parents and all that. However, you have your family, then you have your community, which is the jati. And every jati had all the varnas. And then the jati had the country. And so you had a duty towards your family, you had a duty towards your community, you had a duty towards your country or the area that you lived in. So at some point, I think the fact that you had a duty towards your community and towards your country probably got weakened. Is one possible explanation, because of which people then started focusing only on individual self-enlightened good, that I want to just pursue my path and achieve my goals, whatever they are. That's one possibility. The second possibility, or
on a lighter note, I'm interjecting intentionally. On a lighter note, isn't that what we see on the roads today as well?
Oh, absolutely. If there's an accident, nobody stops to help.
Forget that. I need to get to where I have to get to.
Exactly.
I don't care a damn.
It's the mindset of scarcity, not of abundance. And strangely, India was a land of abundance. India is one of the richest countries in the world in terms of agriculture, land available that can be tilled, and minerals and so on. And by this, I mean the Indian subcontinent, not the political entity called India today. It is one of the richest countries, richest areas in the world. And so...
so this is that plate that came and...
Yes.
The Asian plate,
yes.
Eurasian plate.
Yeah, called the Gondwana land. From Gondwana land, it detached.
Some 70 million years or 120 million years ago, it came and hit, which caused the Himalayas to be formed. Okay.
Yeah. So coming back to your question as to how come we went down this path. So there are many theories. One is our standard metaphysical theory, Kali Yuga, the texture of man is dropping. So his awareness and ability to do the rituals as rituals and derive benefits is dropping. Instead, the ritual becomes a habit, so it degrades. So he's doing it mindlessly and then reversing it. And the tail is now wagging the dog, saying that the ritual is mindless. That kind of... whereas if you read the current crop of ballet dancer, performers, artists in the West, one famous choreographer and dancer is Twyla Tharp. She talks about the importance of rituals. So before she goes into a dance routine or choreography routine, she goes through a set of steps, which she calls a ritual that she performs with mindfulness to be inspired to do the act of creation, to do the dance or to choreograph the dance. That is what our rituals, which we perform, either during festivals or in the mornings or doing the kolam, we have rituals. And if rituals done correctly, actually attune your mind to the activity that's going to happen for that period. Instead, people just do that mindlessly. And so having degraded from ritual to mindlessness, they in reverse are calling the ritual as mindless rather than saying that I'm not doing it correct. So that's...
Ritual has become a derogatory term now.
Yes. And that is, the Hindu metaphysics says maybe it's because of Kali Yuga and the drop in the texture of humans. But on the other hand, it could also be the fact that, we did not study, as you said, I am playing football, but I did not study that the other guy is playing something else. We should have. So there was a contraction in our ability to understand what the opponents were doing. And so when they came and waged wars, you must remember that if in 70 years it went from Arabia to Africa, to Algeria, and came to the boundaries of India, from boundaries of India to come to Delhi, a distance of 400 kilometers, it took 450 years. That actually talks to the depth, strength, and capability of the Indic civilization. that to move thousands of kilometers, took 70 years. To move from here to 450 kilometers, it took them 450 years. That is from when they appeared. So initially they were decimated. And so much so that the Caliph at Baghdad, who was sending these armies to invade India, he said, let's stop this invasion of Hind because the number of Muslims are decreasing because entire armies are getting decimated. When they attacked, they were Bapar Awal, who is not talked about in our history books, decimated their armies. And then eventually at some point, repeated attacks, 100 years they don't appear, then they appear again. And then they get whacked another 100 years.
Isn't that a good thing then? We cannot have the perseverance.
Their perseverance is a good thing. Our absence of transference of knowledge that there is a capacity or a bunch of enemies that are developing, which are intent, are playing the long game on the other side and in the way they are structured. And our inability to have read that and studied that and then to mount an effective counter to eliminate that threat was perhaps something that we did not do well.
It brings me to another question that, another aspect of you, which we will probably introduce to the viewers, to listeners now. You are one of the people who was part of the team that created a new game that uses chess-like pieces, a chess-like board, but is very different, right?
Yes.
Quaternity.
Yes.
And you have 4 players and a 12 by 12 board. And you have black, white, green and red.
Yes.
Right. And in that, one of the things that I learned in terms of playing the game with you is that being able to understand the significance of one action that I do now, the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth order of magnitude in terms of how it can turn out, right? There are certain things that I can predict, certain things I cannot predict, because it's just humanly impossible to predict at the fifth order of magnitude. Second order of magnitude, I have probably a 20 to 25% accuracy. Third order of magnitude, it probably falls down to 5 to 10% of accuracy. But the fact is that 5 to 10% of accuracy is better than 0% of accuracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, not being able to look at the first, the second, the third order of magnitude of any action that anybody does at any point in time, doesn't that reflect on the person? Or if it is done at the level of society or in terms of a culture, doesn't it reflect on the society and culture itself?
Absolutely. And my take is that that trait is still present in our population today. No, it's like a frog boiling in a well. In a warm water, in a vessel of water kept on a stove. If you drop the frog in a warm or hot water, it'll jump out. If you boil it, it'll boil to death because it cannot see how the temperature is increasing and does not.
I did refer to this in one of the initial episodes of the podcast.
Oh, I see.
That, if you put a frog in the water and slowly increase the temperature, it will allow itself to be boiled to death. But if I throw it into a pot of boiling water, it will jump out immediately.
Correct. Because that difference it's able to measure.
Yeah.
So until the calamity is at your door, I think the Indic civilization has not responded. Interestingly, it's the same criticism leveled at managers in corporate India today that they are not very good at assessing first order, second order, third order impacts. Absolutely. Maybe first order they are able to do, but second, third order is completely ignored.
So, again, interjecting intentionally, how good were entrepreneurs at doing this and how good are they now?
So here it's a very, very involved question that you asked, GS. In the past, and some of the communities in India today reflect this, the wealth was well distributed within the society. That means there were communities which did some work which provided value to society, and the work was distributed among different families in that community, and everybody was prosperous. But with the growth of the centralization of thinking, particularly coming from the West, including the internet and computers, it allows any one family to capture all the work done by a community and own it, and then reduce everybody else to jobber, not to a business owner. And that control, or that is a worldview which the West uses, that unbridled growth, unbridled largeness is a good thing. It's not.
Like blitzscaling, right, as they call it?
Yes, blitzscaling. If you look at any of the corporations in the West, they become really huge and they drive everybody else out of business. Amazon drove all the bookshops out of business. Small businesses struggle to stay afloat. But if there are many small businesses, then there are many families, and spin-off benefits from other people they employ percolates down to society. When it is centralized using technology or other mechanisms into a single corporation which is massive, then there is a set of people who are able to look after themselves, the rest are left destitute. So this change needs to come about, whereby...
So again, when you say that people are left destitute, I'm picking up on that, because today the talk is about AI, right? How AI will make so many legions of people completely superfluous and not there. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that is the mode of evolution, isn't it?
Correct.
Survival of the fittest, rather not the survival of the most adaptable, rather than the fittest. Fittest here probably means most adaptable, most able to see the change and reinvent oneself to stay relevant. See, if I'm going to be relevant, I'm never ever going to be not useful.
Correct.
Right? So if an Amazon comes in, as an end user, I derive a lot of benefit from it, right? And all of us do, right? Because, on a jocular note, if I make you make a call to me or I make a call to you, there are times that both of us will have to stop and give the OTP to the guy who's come to deliver us, right? You've called me multiple times and I'm waiting to deliver, to give a OTP, and it's happened to you. So I think, are we making something that is not useful and making it something great is my question. Are we making a weakness and painting it to be a virtue?
Beautiful question, GS, and I'm sure this must be in the minds of many people. So let's continue taking the Amazon example. So there is value creation that Amazon has done, is built a platform. The end customer finds the convenience. However, a single entity controls the entire value and takes a lion's share of the value. The people who come onto that platform, they get some margins, and that margin is almost controlled by Amazon. And they can deplatform you if you don't meet performance criteria and all sorts of stuff. So all that value gets captured and then comes into the hands of a few. Let's contrast this with the ONDC, Open Network Digital Commerce, that Nandan Nilekani and team are building. There they are building a platform where different people can come on the network, and it's equivalent to a public infrastructure that's being built, not a private infrastructure where ONDC will charge a lot of money, but they are building the payment systems, the catalog systems, various elements, and different people come onto that platform to offer their services. So let's say I am selling some items, let's say apparel, or I'm offering tailoring services. I come onto the platform, and then a courier comes onto the platform, and then I list my services with the ONDC, which is like UPI. It's like a public infrastructure, and on some nominal charge, I'm allowed to list. Somebody hunting for these services comes onto the platform, searches, and then finds my services. So I offer to do this, to provide him the garment. The courier offers to deliver. So the courier collects his share. I collect my share. And maybe there is some nominal service charge for being able to find me. And then I again use public infrastructure to pay, UPI or some payment mechanism. So the value that in the Western structure is everything is captured by Amazon, is now distributed between 3 or 4 entities.
So as an end user, will it be as seamless as I have with Amazon?
That is the intention. That's how it has started. So for the entities that are onboarded, you will just say that, hey, you want want a particular good or item. And then when you go through the process, it will put your thing on offer, and whoever is going to do the couriering or rest of the services will apply.
A very interesting thing, once in one of my earlier avatars, I was sitting in California in a client or office, and we had we'd screwed up. And we were trying to win the confidence back. And we explained, they said, but this is what had happened, etc., and they bought it. But then the chief operating officer of that company, and I was the chief operating officer of this division here, we were sitting in a boardroom kind of thing in California, and that person turned around and said, tell me, which is the throat I choke if there's something that goes wrong? And I put my hand up and said, my throat is the one that you choke if there's something that goes wrong, because I'm responsible. Buck stops with me. I'm the person who's responsible for delivering services to you. The reason I'm narrating this is, in an ONDC kind of scenario, where will my redressal come from if there are disparate parts that...
Great question. So again, there is a community aspect to it, and the ONDC is expected to service the small and medium enterprises. You need the one throat to choke concept, or the pinning of responsibility for large projects, for large orders, which you may not necessarily go through ONDC today. Maybe tomorrow they will have a mechanism where they can perhaps do large projects. But this is for...
No, I'm not even talking about large projects, Jay.
Correct.
I'm talking about, let's say I bought something and there's something that's gone wrong. Right? So right now with, let's say, an Amazon or a Flipkart or one of these things, I just call them and say that it has come to me damaged. No questions asked. They say, send me a picture. I send a picture. I get a refund. All of those things. How will that be? This is the process guy in me asking this question.
Great. I'm saying it's a great question. And here is the way I was answering it, that it does not always work, even for Amazon. I have lost many times. For example, they list something from China and you order it. The China guy will say, yeah, you return it, we'll refund. The return costs more money than getting it, because I have to return it to China, and that's in the fine print. So in many cases, the return doesn't work today, and you can't hold Amazon accountable. So it's an illusion that you can actually hold Amazon accountable. In many cases, they return it where it's feasible to do so, and there are a number of cases where you can't return it. So the fact is that there is also some drawbacks of the existing one throat to choke concept. Now, in the ONDC concept, there will also be similar mechanism that you'll offer replacements, or you will, in case the material doesn't reach, either in the contract that's drawn up, these guys, the courier will agree to say that he guarantees the reaching. Otherwise, he bears the cost of replacement. And there will be mechanisms set up to redress that, and it is still evolving. So there will be some teething problems in figuring it out. However, my contention is that this problem exists even today in the existing systems. However, the way it has been marketed, and the fact that for the basic stuff, the returns are allowed, and creates the illusion that everything works. It does not.
The reason I asked, again, as I'm thinking, isn't this how the history that we are complaining has been misrepresented might have come about?
How
that, the story, it's the illusion that there is a redressal mechanism.
Right.
In the Amazon or whatever it is. I don't want Amazon to come after me. Right? In any kind of online marketplace, there is the illusion that I have the freedom to return. Right? Mm-hmm. While it really doesn't exist.
In all cases,
it might not exist. So there is a certain amount of things that are overtly stated and certain things that are not overtly stated. They are in the fine print, right? The reason I'm smiling is when we were, we was part of the team that was part of the team that got the credit card business going in India with Citibank. And there was this, the first time I came across what was called 3-point print.
What you sign to agree, what you agree to when you sign.
Right? Because we had to compress a lot of information. Not that we were trying to be smart. We weren't trying to definitely dupe people. But just that we had to look at it from their perspective. We had to give it in one application form, and we had to give them all of it as well. And there was no way we could give them 20 pages of paper. It would become very difficult. So I'm coming back to, did our history get rewritten, so to say, on the same basis?
I won't come. Rewritten is a strong word, but I would say that certain lenses were used. So if you look at the original outstanding historians that we've had, like Rakhal Das Banerjee, R.C. Majumdar, Radhakumar Mukherjee, R.K. Mukherjee, there are some really deep work that they have done. However, after independence, what happened, this is a thing well known, that the Congress party in the Gandhi got in, required a coalition with or support from the same communists, and the communists took over the education, and then they had a particular lens or a view of how history should be presented, and that was what has happened. And so entire generations have grown up looking at history books which are written by the communists who had captured this education department.
So, again, I'm going completely maybe on a tangent, but anything that is said, everybody thinks that they are doing good for the world, right?
Correct.
Right now, this podcast, it was a chance encounter. I'd been mulling over the podcast for 4 years. And then I went and met my friend Arun one day at his office. And then he introduced me to 2 youngsters who were there. And then he said, let's go for a cup of coffee. We went and had a cup of coffee. And as we were talking, one of the people had a tattoo on his hand. And I looked at the tattoo and I asked him a question. And then we had a conversation, an exchange, a dialogue. And then one of the other people who were there, and they are in the room right now, as they are recording this, both of them are here. He turned around and looked and said, you know what, this would make, what you're talking about would make a lovely podcast. So this podcast, it led to me having to battle all of this, this combination of suddenly feeling elated, SPB, Yesudas, Kishore Kumar, my favorite, all of them rolled into one, my voice, somebody is praising it. But the core thought behind the podcast for me was that I wanted to do good for the world. That there is a certain amount of knowledge, information that is available. I'm not saying I know it all, but I'm giving one perspective. And as much as possible, I will give a balanced, a blended perspective, which doesn't mean that I'm going to condone nonsense. I'm certainly not going to condone nonsense. I might have my personal views, certain things that are personal to me. 2 things that are very personal to me are religion and politics, right? Those 2, I will keep them with myself, but everything else I'll speak and I will make it available to the world. So I'm making this, I'm having guests like you come and share your thoughts, your views and all of that in my mind for doing good for the world, right? I also say that meaning well does not mean that I will do well. Because meaning well is at the level of intent. Doing well is at the level of action. Words should never be confused for action, as you say. So just because I mean well does not mean that I will do well. But that cannot take anything away from the fact that I mean well. In my mind, in my frame of thinking, given all that I know, even if I am doing this covertly to convert you to my way of thinking, I am not doing this to control you. I genuinely believe that I'm doing you good. How's that wrong?
So it's a very deep question you ask, because you are sort of conflating genuine belief without any proof that whether that belief leads to the good.
It doesn't matter.
And I'm saying it does, because when you conflate the end result with the fact that you believe that it will lead to end result, without demonstrating it does, or without having proof that it does, then all the consequences of your belief of trying to say, for example, you convert X into a particular mode of thinking, and that leads to that person's negative experiences after that, then it has not been good for him. So your belief actually did not translate in reality for good experience. Without having assessed that objectively, the fact that I have a belief is not sufficient that the end result will transfer as the end result will automatically get translated from my belief.
Let me also, I came across this wonderful thing where they say, if you believe, you don't know. If you know, you don't have to believe. Let's assume I know that this is for your good. In my mind, I know this is good for you. Mm-hmm. There's no question of belief. I know it is good for you. But you and I might differ on what is good for you.
Right. And so not only that, whether what transpires is good or not may also have different definitions. And so therefore then you are enforcing, you're sort of insisting that your worldview supersedes what I may believe without having me agree to it. And you're trying to force me into a particular way of thinking. And that, I think, is not compatible with the way human spirit is. Human spirit technically is meant to, each human is meant to evolve in its own way, or his or her own way, and arrive at the truth. It's a journey that each spirit undertakes. If anybody forces that journey into a particular direction, then that person then takes the consequences upon themselves.
Isn't that a very, very, very small minority that adopts that view in terms of actually being that way and saying, to each their own?
Correct. And it is a small minority, and that's very correct. And the parallel that I will draw in this case is many entities come into existence which believe that they are doing good. And once that entity comes into existence, it will work at its own, in its own interest, in its own persistence. And to take a very segued example, take the military-industrial complex that came into being during World War I, after World War I, before World War II, during World War II. And that military-industrial complex needs wars across the world to survive. And so constantly we find wars happening because the Western military-industrial complex is pumping weapons. We saw recently into Afghanistan, into Ukraine, into Israel, and the stock prices of these military-industrial complex components are rising, going through the roof. So that entity came into existence, and each member of that entity thinks, I am doing the right thing because I must meet my goals. The company must be profitable. We must make more weapons. But automatically, what does that mean? That means people die in wars. There is death and devastation in different parts of the world. That somehow, you block that off from your worldview.
So I heard this in a discourse, very interesting point that I heard in a discourse recently. A person dies in a heart attack, right? If I say that, what would you say to that? A person has died with a heart attack.
Okay.
What would you say to that?
I would say Om Shanti.
It's a process of life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How is it different that 100,000 people die?
Because the death is not human. The person dying of a heart attack, he's not causing his heart attack. Somebody, if other people cause the stuff, you can interpret in different ways. If I intentionally cause the death of another person, then it conflicts with what are in cliched fashion called universal human values. But it is the human respect for life and for humanity which gets...
is it only for humanity, or should it
for
be
any life? So if a human dies of a heart attack, it's a natural course of life. if a human dies because of a war happening, because he's a soldier, it is still a natural course of life. But when humans die, when humans cause wars, then those who cause wars in which people die, the causation of that war, never mind who initiates it, would have been triggered by something which is not in line with respect and appreciation of the human spirit. So let's take war. People died in wars, right? In the Mahabharata, they died in the taking from Indic epics.
Incidentally, I was again in a recent discourse I heard that after the Mahabharata war, the statement in the Mahabharata that was written, so 4 or 5 men were around, is what it says.
Yes.
So that many number of people died.
Millions of people died, yeah. Even though the story seems to think that only 5 people fought, these 5 names fought these other 10 or 12 names or something of that sort, or maybe 20 names for 30 names. But a lot of it's just armies fighting each other. So
one more place that I heard was 90% of all male members that were present died.
There was a Dasara Ragna war, Dashara War of the 10 Kings, which preceded the Mahabharata war by millennia, I think. It was where a lot of the humanity got wiped out. So, in every war, there is a cause. And some wars are fought in defense, some wars are fought in offense. So, when wars are fought in defense, and I'm assuming that people would seek to peaceful ways out, then there is one part of the equation that is not respectful of this human spirit of humanity. And so they either seek to enforce something or seek to deny something or seek to...
Is rolling? We can start from that chimpanzees, human.
So 7 million years ago, human beings didn't exist. Chimpanzees didn't exist. There was a common ancestor. Okay, I have not done the research. I am relying on the work of Professor Tetsuro Matsuzawa, and therefore, if there is somebody who wants to correct me, they can correct me. But this is entirely based on that. And herbivores living in the trees, and we became so many in number that the trees could not support us. So the strong ones pushed the weak ones down. The weak ones that came down, where they were herbivores, they never predated on anything else, and they now became the prey. They were predated upon by everything that was eating meat. And they died in countless numbers. But that is also when there is this theory which says that from 4, they went to 2, to see where there was danger coming from. And because they were able to see, they said, you know what, it's no use if I can just see, I now also need to communicate. So this thing about community, that safety in numbers, of all of that was as a direct result of being oppressed upon, and we evolved. And from there on, there's this wonderful... if you haven't seen this, please, Jaya, there is this YouTube originals called the Cognitive Trade-off Hypothesis, in which this is spoken about. That in many ways led to the development of language, which led to the human beings becoming the predominant species on the planet. Okay? So, if you look at it, in the life of that one ancestor who was pushed down from that tree and started dying, it was a catastrophe. That life came to an end. But if you look at the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, millionth order of magnitude of things, is you and me sitting here having a podcast exchange talking about something, and there are other people who are able to understand it as well. One story. The second one is, again, I came across in a TED talk by a person called Tom Chi, where he talks about the interconnectedness of everything in the world. And he said that carbon dioxide was the predominant thing in the human atmosphere, in the Earth's atmosphere. And the first inhabitants were the cyanobacteria. They would inhale carbon dioxide, give out one breath of oxygen and die. So the first cyanobacteria, they would take one breath, exhale and die. And then they were able to do that countless number of times. So if you look at the life of that cyanobacteria that took one breath and died, catastrophe. But then that led to the entire oceans being oxygenated, and then oxygen being so much in the atmosphere that it was able to support multicellular life. Third story. We have, in the animal kingdom, we have lions. Right? And lion cubs are fighting with each other. Why are they fighting with each other? Because they now know that they need to be ready for the future. Right? When I need to be on my own, I need to be able to take care of myself. It takes on a different twist there that, there can only one lion or whatever it is, therefore everybody else is thrown out.
Yeah.
In India, in the tigers, it is that even if it is three sisters, two sisters are thrown out and the tigress stays and rules the roost. Okay. The reason I'm leading to all of this is we spoke about the death and imposing and all of that. Maybe all the wars, maybe all the oppression, the same oppressors that we have so much problems with. If, let's say, there was an alien invasion, who do you think is going to fight? Are you and I going to fight, or are the oppressors going to fight? Whether they fight to preserve themselves or to preserve humanity is different. The fact is that they will fight, if only to save themselves if there was an alien invasion. Correct. At that time, the same thing that we are now dissing, we would then say that they are, if I can use the word, God's gift to mankind. So isn't it... So are we now, when you talk about conflating things, are we then missing the point is my question.
So here is my, here is the way I'm thinking about what you're saying. So the fact that these humans in your first story got, or rather the
common ancestor.
The common ancestor got pushed off the trees and evolved into humans, they would have fought and there would have been some way they would have lived. And eventually they got onto their two legs, and there was a process by which they arrived at becoming Homo habilis, Homo erectus and humans. What we are doing today is probably the same process. And so, including questioning what's going on is part of the process.
Absolutely.
So, it is possible. And if you're saying that there is an alien invasion, which is a hypothetical question, which at this point we don't know whether that's really true, because right, the nearest star is 93 light years and we are in a prison where it is look but don't touch. You can see through the JWST everything, but there is not a chance in hell, even if we had a spaceship traveling at the speed of light, for something to reach in one human's lifetime the closest planet. So unless there is a huge breakthrough and there is stuff that we don't...
That's our limitation.
Correct. Agreed. And I'm saying that therefore we can these are hypothetical situations, but you are absolutely right in the sense that what we are doing, if we completely abstract ourselves out of the situation and are looking down, including questioning what's going on, including all different ways of discussing, would be a part of evolution, and is obviously is. What will eventually win out, we don't know. Because a particular structure evolved in a particular way in the past, only in data mining, the past is a predictor of the future. In reality, the past is not a predictor of the future, as you and I well know. Any black swan event could turn the direction of humanity.
Correct.
So I completely agree with you that all this churning of debate and coming up with different hypotheses and possibilities and risks are all part of that process. It is probably we are doing exactly what those common ancestor did after coming off of the trees on the ground and trying to figure out how to survive. This is probably what's going on. And maybe it is. And questioning it is part of the process. And thinking about even death or dying, or hey, were there better things available in the past and we should see how much of that can be adopted in the current context, is also part of that. and because of which perhaps a new way of thinking and a new way of doing things could potentially emerge. And so that is very much the possibility. But having said that, we must do what we are doing. Because if our common ancestor hadn't done what he did, we would not be sitting here today. So we must continue.
Which is exactly why I'm playing the devil's advocate.
Right.
Because there could be somebody who is watching or listening who would want to ask the question that I'm asking.
Correct.
And I think that is one more thing that you and I, we've spoken about it at length. The ability to hold to exactly opposing views and be able to speak with as much conviction about both opposing points of view. Isn't that something that is useful and very important for us to be considered a human?
Not only considered human, it's not just useful and important. I think it's an important forward step in the ability to progress thinking capacities in humans. That is, you can hold two opposing views in the mind at the same time and still debate and argue rationally and be able to see both prisms. It's that famous Escher drawings you get, right? Sometimes you see a young woman, sometimes you see a old woman in the same drawing. And it is possible that you will see different things and not get thrown off by it or not get, puzzled or confused. The fact is that they are all perspectives. And all perspectives may be simultaneously true at different levels. It's definitely true that, hey, we have to question whether our history is correctly written, and if not, see if it needs to be sorted out. It's certainly true that wars are unnecessary. Sometimes there is a good and a bad side in a war, or two bad sides in a war. There can't be two good sides in a war. Because then too good.
But then the person who is taking my side, I think I am good.
Correct. And
you think you're good.
Correct.
And we might be opposing 180 degrees.
Correct.
But then there are two good sides in the war.
They think there are two good sides in the war, but objectively you don't know whether any side is good at all. This is like Bhishma is a good man, but he fought on the sides of the Kauravas, and therefore is the Kauravas a good side? The narrative says that Kauravas are not the good side because they were depriving the Pandavas of what was their right. But good people fought on their side in the war because of whatever were...
On both sides.
On both sides. Therefore, you can simultaneously have like yin and yang getting into each other. You can have good and bad on both sides. So there are no good sides, and there are anything which results in destruction. If it is a creative destruction, perhaps it's a good thing for the evolutionary process of humanity as an organism. We know that, hey, individuals are organisms. Cells then come together. First there are cells, then there are organisms. Then each of the organisms come together to form living entities. Living entities form communities which are organisms. Communities then form countries which are also organisms. Like that, humanity is an organism. So each organism has its own evolutionary path.
I heard that in a talk, that the planet is an organism.
Exactly. It's called Gaia, and we call it the mother goddess, Sri Devi and Bhudevi here. Okay. We have Bhudevi. So we have ways of representing that in different cultures in different ways. And so each of these may be true at the same time at different levels of reality, so to say. I mean, what is real is also, what is real at the level of a cell may be different at the...
Two things that, when we're talking about history, one of the things that it came to me and I shared it with people, I also wrote about it once, is that the importance is to learn the lesson and forget the pain. I have to learn the lesson and forget the pain. Many people think that they have to keep the pain alive to remember the lesson. But if I've learned the lesson, then I don't need the pain. I understand that it could be painful if I forget the lesson. That's all I need to know. And I said this to my best friend at that time, and I told him at that time, and he called me back 2 days later, incidentally, and he said, "Hey, Cheenu, I'm doing exactly this stuff, but exactly the opposite. All the pain and remembering, I'm forgetting all the lessons." Right? So, the reason I made this statement is, are we over-indexing on history? Because history, I understand what has been said. Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Somebody said it. I don't know who said it.
Santayana.
Right? Those who forget history or don't, they are doomed to repeat it.
Lessons of history.
So is it the lessons of history? So are we, in this context of, the schools, the history and all of that, are we missing the wood for the trees? Are we not focusing on the lessons that we are supposed to learn? And are we getting over-indexing on what is being mentioned? Is it the difference between a ritual and a habit is my question.
I would think that you have to have the correct ritual. You have to have the correct history to learn the right lesson. Otherwise, you end up learning something which may not even be a lesson.
See, again, I'm asking you this question, Jaya. Is history important or the lessons important?
So
if you could choose only one.
So, correct. But you have to have the history for the lesson.
No. I might need the history to explain to people.
No, you to have the correct lesson in the first place.
No. When people come to me, some of them, they tell me this. Recently, I had a person who was on a session with me and they said, so what do you want? How can I be of service to you? And the person says, I want to understand. I want to understand how I can, why I'm unhappy. I said, okay. So by understanding, what will you get? And the person said, I'll be able to handle it. I said, isn't that a leap of faith that you're making? That if you understand the reason for the problem, that you'll be able to solve for it? Instead of that, if I give you two options and I say, this is the understanding, this is the solution, you can get only one. Which one will you take? And people say, you're playing with words. I said, no, choose. If you have the understanding, you will not have the solution. If you have the solution, you'll never understand why it happened. When I put it that way, they tell me, give me the solution. So my question is, if you could learn the lessons and you could have accurate history, and you could have only one of them, which would you choose?
There is absolutely no doubt that you will choose
the lessons.
The lesson. This is like, I will teach you how the internal combustion engine works, or I'll teach you how to drive the car. Depending on where you are in life, you will say, hey, teach me to drive the car because that's more practical.
But if I'm an engineer, then I'd like to know this.
Combustion engine. Now, however, when we are still at the stage where the internal combustion engine is being designed, has to be correctly designed to drive the car, and the car is not correctly existing, we have to get the internal combustion engine correct. If we don't get that correct, then the car will not move. And one of the issues that we face, you are absolutely right in the sense that the lessons of history have to go in, but are the right lessons going in? And the example that I would pick is, hey, if you are taught that the British rule was good for India, which is what I ended up learning when I was growing up in school, that, hey, they brought railways, they brought English, and so we were not civilized, and there was caste cows and curry and sati and, all the ills, and it was the British who really raised us up. Then the lesson that I'm learning is, hey, we should obviously not have all these ills in society. And the fact is that people who come from outside are able to see us and understand us better. And therefore, we should listen to when people give you, this is the lesson that I learned. It took me a long time to realize that that was not a lesson, that was propaganda. And so when I get the right history, then I understand, okay, these are actually the lessons and that we should never be colonized again. And we should be, obviously, we should be able to be critiqued by an external view. And we should make sure that we are open, which we were in the past. We were open to inputs, to people coming in, to new thoughts, new ideas, and debating with them and integrating the good parts. And then we got closed up. And then somebody came up in control of us and closed it completely so that they would remain in control. So our first job is to make sure we don't fall into a position where other people can control us so completely that we are shielded off from any external influence.
But hasn't that been the case forever? That we've had a feudal system.
No.
We had kings, ministers, and they would lay down the laws, the edicts, and all of that.
No.
Just that it followed there was a certain synergy across a certain geographical region. We had kingdoms, but we followed a certain common operating system, so to say.
So,
right? But isn't that the way it was.
No, actually it wasn't. Yes, in the following way. So I'll pick one example. So the kings in the past had duties allowed to them, which were well understood and codified by Chanakya. For example, in his book, How Administration Should Be Done. It was not just a economics book, what Chanakya's book was. And
The Arthashastra.
Arthashastra. Yeah, and I was waiting for the name to come into my head. And for example, in the early stages, the king could only do 18% taxes. And the king could not take away somebody's property. Today's state can take away your property. I don't know if you're aware. If it comes to that, the king could not take away the property. And so there were rules enjoined on the king by which they had to serve dharma. And that is the reason why perhaps the Padmanabha Swami temple has those, I don't know if it still has after the political dispensation took over, but the Maharaja of Travancore, he was the guardian of that temple, and all the gold was kept in safe custody and turned over to the government of India by the Maharaja of Travancore, saying, hey, we were the custodians. You have to say whether we are continuing to be the custodians or the government is the custodians. And the court has given the temple back to them recently. So they did not take anything unlawfully from that temple, and it had so much of riches. The king lived in a particular way, which is very different from the view of feudalism that is there in the West, in which the king was the whole and soul of everything. You lived according to the whims and fancies of the king. Here the king could not. If the king did something against the principles of kingship, the king had to pay a price, and he would have to step down or pay a penalty. And if you go back to our scriptures, the Pandavas fought the Mahabharata war, but they had to go through the consequences of having done all that they did, including killing people in the war, which was supposedly a righteous war. Even Krishna paid the price and his death for something which he did by mistake in the past. He had to pay the price. So everybody has to face the consequences of their action. The Western feudal system, the king is God, is the regent of God, and therefore can never make a mistake. And your very life used to be at the whims and fancies of the king. So if the king did something to you, he was well within his right to do so, because you live at the behest of the king.
So my question is this, Jay. This is something that I ask people as well. See, that is their belief system, that is their the tenets by which they live. The tenets by which we live here are that, Sanatana Dharma, everything is equal and all of those things. Why should we be worried about what their tenets are?
Because of what happened in history. No? If we let down our guard, which we apparently in some way we did, they could come into control and they would impose their views on us.
So what's wrong?
And if you look at it from the level of humanity, and if that continues, okay, that is the way humanity is evolving. However, that was not, because the British got thrown out of India. And so that is the way humanity is evolving if you view it from that level. If you view it from the level of Vyavaharika, that is our day-to-day existence, then we should object to being imposed upon by a system which we think is not equitable to all elements of society. That's how I would view it.
So the reason I'm smiling is that, we talk about anti-fragility. We talk about vaccinations, right? Vaccinations are a wonderful way where anti-fragility is demonstrated.
Correct.
So we inject the virus and we get the body to create antibodies, and so that we are stronger and we are immune to that virus in the future.
Correct.
So why can't we look at all of this as vaccinations?
Absolutely. And I'm saying that you are absolutely right. And that's probably exactly what it is. Because if we have successfully been able to clear that vaccination, then our society and body politic should emerge stronger. And next attempt to do the same should be repelled with the strength that the society would have developed at that time. That's how I will handle it. And maybe the process of discussions debate, making people aware is all part of it.
Yeah. See, I think, this is something that you use very, very often. And I heard it first used by our common boss. It's okay to disagree, but never okay to be disagreeable. Right? And I think you said that a doyen of Indian IT industry is the person who said it for the first time. And this boss of ours was also on the board of that company there.
Yes.
Which is probably where this person heard it. And then, obviously, anybody who has achieved something has done something useful in life. So I think, why I'm asking this question, I'm giving you all this preamble for this. Somewhere in society today, do you believe that we have stopped talking on the merits of what we are supposed to be talking on, and instead we are just being disagreeable?
That I agree, and that is actually a very astute observation. And for some reason, we seem to have lost the ability to debate, to hold opposing points of view, to present different pros and cons, and instead become very emotional and then react. Instead of, we are thinking, hey, we are having a reasoned debate. So I will present a few pros and cons, you will present a few pros and cons. And you and I may still not agree, maybe agree, or change our viewpoint sometime in the future. But the onlookers can decide for themselves what they go with. That's a reasoned debate. And the onlookers or the people who are hearing the debate can decide for themselves how convincing and authentic each presentation of each proposition is. However, I think we tend to lose sight of that and have a disagreement overflow into areas very emotionally charged, and then break relationships by becoming disagreeable. And I think that's a skill which we really need to work on to make sure that all successive generations are able to come up to the level of debating.
I'll link us back to the HappYness Helix. If you remember, landing 5 is I have greater self-confidence, self-belief, which leads me to landing 6, which is I will start looking at objectives or causes that are not just being focused on me or my small circle. I'll be looking at the larger. So when would I be disagreeable? And as Kichi would say in the communication workshop, if I can't prove myself right, the least I can do is to prove you wrong. So to prove you wrong, it is like, I never ever agree with this concept of sledging in any game. There are 2 schools of thought. One school of thought says that this is both mind and skill. I say no. To me, it is, if it's a sport, it's a sport, right? Focus on that. Let's not do some mental gymnastics here. So to me, when I disagree with you and I start making personal attacks on you, it is the equivalent of sledging.
Correct.
Right? And therefore, today, the norm seems to be sledging rather than having a debate or playing the game.
Sadly, I have to agree with you that. And therefore, the whole conversation and the topics that's under discussion and the pros and cons, and people, despite whatever their belief system be, they may have some interesting points and aspects to highlight. And that gets lost because you sort of conflate, like you conflate the role with the person in corporates, you conflate the view with the person. The person may have a view in one context and may have a completely different view in another context, because people are complex after all. And I think that gets lost. And then one particular view in one particular dimension then becomes something defining the person, and that's something we shouldn't be doing at all.
I'm going to bring this to an abrupt close. Why? Because I think you and I, if we sat down and spoke like this, we can speak for another 24 hours, 48 hours, and we'll continue, and we'll have all the energy, right? And I also heard that there's this person called Sukhi Shivam who gives discourses in Tamil. Yeah. He said it beautifully. It is better that people say, why did he stop talking? Rather than, when will he stop talking? So, I think, this topic, I'm realizing that most of the dialogues, the exchanges that I have with guests on the podcast they're all incomplete. They're all incomplete because there is so much more that we can talk about. And I know with you, I'm not taking a rain check. Okay? I know I will call you one day and say, you know what, let's have another series of chats, right? So, but I do have one question for you for this 3-part series to conclude. What is happiness to you? I know that you said right at the beginning that there is a certain definition of happiness. 2 questions for you. One, if you had to say it in one sentence, what is happiness? And 2, what is one message that is very, very important for you to get out to the world? So, even if you don't answer what happiness is fine.
They are linked, actually.
Okay, lovely.
So that's very interesting that you should ask the question in that way. So people often think, when I ask this question, what is happiness to you? It is not happiness to me alone. It is happiness. Happiness is a state for me and my context.
Beautiful, beautiful.
People in my context, which is my family, friends, people I interact with. And if I'm able to make a difference to them, a positive difference, and feel the momentum or the energy that comes from that, reciprocally, if I were to do this Mahatma thing or the always giving and never receiving, then I think there's an asymmetry in the relationship, and it is not a happy relationship actually. If it is reciprocal and there is a give and take, and I'm able to positively influence people in my context and be reciprocally influenced by them, then I'm in a state of happiness. And therefore, nobody connected with me, if I am doing extremely well, if I'm a billionaire, then the least people around me should be millionaires. If I am a millionaire, then people around me should be whatever, appropriately. That is, if I am prospering in life, the people who work with me, who work for me and in the house, who are my colleagues, who are my friends, should all have benefited from what, as much as possible, from what I am able to see. And reciprocally, when they do well, I would also like to benefit. And from their benefit from their insights, from what they have learned in life. Also, if I am able to support them and be supported by them, then that state is happiness. And the thing that I would like to get across to the world is, when somebody asks, are you happy? Then one should examine this question not as is, am I personally feeling happy? You may personally be feeling happy, but if your family member is not happy, then your response should be, I'm not happy. If the maid in your working in your house, or the driver who works for you, or some of your close associates, and you have to have a certain limit, because we are not people with infinite resources. Whatever your circle of influence is, the circle to which you can provide this support, if members of them have a big problem in life or are struggling through life, and you have not made a difference to them, then even if you are personally having holidays and feeling elated, you are actually not happy. You are just borrowed somebody's definition, label to that, and attach it to yours. So that is how I would answer your question. So your question was an incredibly astute one, in the sense that this is what I would share with the world, that sometimes you say, how do you know a master is living in this place? How do you know Periyar was Kanchi? Look around him. When you look at people around him, you know that Kanchi, that there's a master living there. Look around at the people around him. Look at the environment around him. And that is true for each one of us. Look around you. Look around me. Look around the people who work with me. if somebody is in abject poverty and continues to be in abject poverty, while I have become the greatest movie superstar of all time and my book is being paid $10,000 a month, I'm not sure whether if I were in that position, I would call myself happy. And that's my thinking, sir.
Thank you, Jaya. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me this entire day. And hopefully people who watch these three-part series will benefit. And one of the things that I wanted to also bring about through this podcast is that there is wisdom, there is knowledge, there is learning in everyone on this planet.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? And just like that statement, there are no strangers, only friends who haven't yet met. There are no foolish people. There are only wise people. The world does not know all of them. So I am privileged to call you my friend. And thank you for giving me the time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I hope people who are watching this appreciate the honesty with which this dialogue has taken place. And I'm going to make the request, and I'd like you to make the same request. So please watch and share with at least one person, and subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up, and make us feel good by sharing it out with people so that more people can get to know that there are people who think not just about themselves but other people as well. All the very best to you.
Thank you, GS. And I will join my voice to yours and ask people to share the video with at least one other person and make sure they subscribe to the channel. There are a lot of interesting people. I follow the channel and I was very surprised when GS said that he wanted to have a podcast with me, because some of the people who have preceded me are incredibly talented, gifted, and have done a far more. To just be on the same program as them itself is a privilege. So thank you very much.
So I'll also add one more thing. Jaya keeps calling me GS. That's how he knows me, because I was one of 5 Srinivas in class 7. And the class teacher at that time called me by my initials, which is GS. So most of my life, I went through life as GS. At home, I used to be called Cheenu. So there are people like Jaya who call me GS sometimes, Cheenu sometimes. So don't think that there is somebody else that he's talking about. So keep smiling, stay happy. Thank you.
Thank you.